This camera rig is the result of years of trial and error, but I finally got it right. So stick around and I'll show you how to build this from the ground up every step of the way.
'Cause I've been down, down, down. I've been down, so down, and now I'm done. I'm aiming for the sky. Don't let me down.
I hate wasting time reconfiguring my rig while on a shoot. So I needed something that was lightweight, easy to work on, and easy to transition between locked off, handheld, and gimbal shots. It doesn't seem like a difficult thing to accomplish, but it took a long time and a lot of wasted money before I found a solution that I was happy with. So hopefully this video helps you all get to a good place sooner than I did and with less headache. Before we get started, I do want to say that I was not paid or sent any of the parts featured in this video for free. I bought everything with my own money. Also, for this video, I'm going to be using a Sony a7 IV, but this rig will pretty much work with any mirrorless camera out there. Let's start off with the heart of the rig, the camera cage. My favorite cage for the Sony a7S III and a7 IV is the SmallRig 3639 half cage. I did a whole video about why I like this cage so much. I'll be sure to link it up here and down below in the description so you guys can check it out. The short version of why I like this cage so much is because it's so small, lightweight, it has all the mounting points that I would ever need, and more importantly, at least to me, is that this cage mounts to the DJI gimbals without having to remove the gimbal plate from the gimbal itself, and I don't have to add any extra plates to the bottom of the cage.
Things in the air. I can feel it everywhere.
Now let's add the top handle. There are a million different options out there when it comes to top handles, so it can be a little confusing trying to decide which one is best for you. My advice is to think about two things. One, how do you want to mount the handle to your cage? And two, what kind of accessories do you need to mount to your handle? I ended up going with a SmallRig RE attachment top handle like this. I initially thought that I wanted a NATO clamp type top handle, but I soon realized that I didn't want to take that extra step every time I was setting up my rig to attach a Nato Rail to the top of my cage. And I definitely didn't want to leave one on there permanently because I often use my a7 IV for photography and a Nato Rail is completely not needed. The thing that sealed the deal for me with the RE handle was that this cage already has RE locating pins and the attachment hole on the top of the cage. So going for the RE attachment handle was a no-brainer. I often have to move my Atomos Ninja 5 from different rigs and different setups. So I knew that I wanted to attach it to my top handle with NATO clamps because that's the quickest, easiest thing to do. So because this handle has an RE locating pin at the front, I got this NATO rail that has an RE attachment at the bottom. So that's what I'm going to stick onto the front of the rail of the handle right here. Done. That's where I'm going to attach my monitor. I'm a big fan of clean cable management, so I picked up a pack of these SmallRig cable clamps that attach with 1/4-20 screws. I'm going to attach it to the side of the handle right here to help me manage the extra length that I have with my HDMI cable. Now, if you're wondering why I don't just use a shorter HDMI cable, well, it's because I chose this very pliable and appropriately lengthed HDMI cable so that way it could work with this rig, but also I could transfer this entire rig over to my gimbal without having to remove the HDMI cable because this cable is long enough to give me enough slack to use with my gimbal.
So high, 'cause I've been down, down, down. I've been down, so down, and now I'm done. I'm aiming for the
Speaking of HDMI cables, I'm often recording directly to my Atomos Ninja 5, so the last thing I want to do is have my HDMI cable accidentally become unplugged or damaged. So I like to use these HDMI cable clamps that are designed to work with this half cage. If you notice, you see those two little slots on the cage? Those are meant to accept and align the HDMI cable clamp. So that's where I'm going to install it. And the cool thing about this clamp too is that it's kind of self-tightening. You just tighten it up and it automatically snugs onto the cable. Now I'm going to do my cable management here. I wrap it around the handle a few times, routing it through the cable clamp, and that's perfect length to plug right into my Ninja. I'm using a small rig side handle here for another point of contact, for more stability, for comfort, but also more importantly, it has a cold shoe mount on top, so that way I can mount either my Rode wireless microphones or my shotgun microphone onto the camera. Done. Not as fast as a Nato Rail clamp, but that wasn't too bad. And another nice thing is that this handle can be adjusted to move up and down, so you can get it right in the perfectly comfortable position for you. Moving on to the base of the rig. Now this is where things start to get really fun. Here I have the Small Rig 2272 base plate. And as you can see, it has an integrated Arca Swiss clamp that's mounted left to right. And it also has a vertical adjustment so you can dial in the height of your entire rig, which is nice. So this base plate was working really well, except for a few things that ultimately really bugged me. One, because it has the Arca Swiss plate that's mounted left to right and it doesn't have any stops, it's impossible to just slide your camera in and have it aligned to the center perfectly every single time. I ended up wasting a lot of time trying to eyeball where the center of this thing was, and for someone who's OCD like me, it was driving me crazy. Another thing is, because again it's mounted left to right, you can't balance your rig. You can't slide it forward or backwards to find the balance point. So because of those two things, I decided to make a few adjustments to this. What I did was, I went and I bought this Manfrotto clamp from Camvate, and I bought a spare DJI gimbal plate. Now how these two things work is, this plate replaces the Arca plate that's on the Small Rig base plate. So once you have the Camvate plate installed, it can accept the DJI plates, which have an automatically centering Arca Swiss clamp built in. This is what it looks like all said and done. And it slides in perfectly, and you hear that? It stops automatically right in the right spot, perfectly centered. Awesome. If you're not as OCD as me about centering and balancing your camera, then feel free to skip this last step, because the plate that came with the Small Rig base plate, this will work fine if you're not worried about having to center your camera or balance it. I hate wobbly and unstable camera rigs. They're really hard to work on, and you just don't feel safe when you set them down. So a few years back, I picked up this Kessler crane quick stand. It's built like a tank. It has a built-in Arca Swiss plate at the bottom. It attaches with a 3/8 and a quarter 20-inch screw, and it's awesome. I love it. However, this XL version sets you back about $125 US, which is really, really pricey for what it is. Since the time that I bought this, actually I just recently found that Nicey Rig is making comparable products for a much cheaper price. And I bought this one because it's actually Manfrotto compatible for when I want to use my fluid head. And they also do offer this in an Arca Swiss variation. And these are on Amazon right now for 40 bucks US, which is pretty awesome.
Sky, don't let me down. Don't let me down. Aiming for the sky, don't let me down.
Now let's add our 15mm rods. These are just standard aluminum small rig 15mm rods. These are 8-inch long versions, but it's always good to have an assortment of lengths in your kit so that way you can change up your rig to accommodate different size lenses and other gear. The 8-inch ones seem to work well for me for most scenarios. Moving on to the V-mount battery and the V-lock mount. Now I've heard a ton of horror stories about bad electronics and power supplies ruining things like cameras, monitors, and other pieces of gear. So I spent a lot of time thinking about my entire power delivery system. First of all, as much as I like companies like Small Rig, Nicey Rig, and others, I don't really see them as electronics experts quite yet. So I have a hard time trusting them to break out the power from my V-mount battery to my entire system. Because of this, I needed to find a V-mount battery that had all of the voltages and connections built into the battery to power everything on my rig. I wanted everything to be powered by one battery. I ended up going with the FX Lion Nano 2, which is a 98 watt-hour lithium-ion battery. It has a USB-C port which supports power delivery, and that's what I use to power my camera. Now, before we go any further, I do want to say something. I do not use dummy batteries. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think I've ever come across one that is actually good quality. They all seem very cheaply made. And there are a ton of horror stories out there. Feel free to search for them yourself of dummy batteries failing. If they go short circuit, then you'll get way more voltage into your camera than it supports, most likely. And cameras are not very forgiving of that. So I've heard stories of failed cameras. I don't think it's a good idea. Another reason why I don't use dummy batteries is because if the connection fails or the battery fails, or even if the V-mount battery that you're using runs out of juice, your camera is just going to shut off. I like to use a Sony battery in the camera and use the V-mount to charge that internal camera battery via USB-C. This setup keeps the internal camera battery pretty much fully topped off until the V-mount battery dies. And even if the V-mount battery does die, your camera won't shut off because it's still getting power from the internal battery. Which means that you can hot swap these V-mount batteries even in the middle of a recording, as long as you're recording internally and not to an external recorder that you're powering from the V-mount. In addition to the Type-C port found on this battery, you also have a Type-A port, which I use to power my Zoom H4n Pro when I do need an external audio recorder. And it also has a D-tap, which I use to power my Atomos Ninja 5. Since my V-mount battery is doing all of the heavy lifting and breaking out all of my connections to the rest of my system, I was able to get away with this nice, simple, small rig plate. It's completely passive and it comes with the 15mm rod adapter. Now this works pretty well, except with my particular rig, I ran into an issue that was killing my OCD again. So let me show you. That red button right there, it keeps the LCD from being able to sit flush against the battery. It's just asking to get knocked or snagged on something and broken. Okay, so that just wasn't gonna work. So what I ended up doing was I found this plate on Amazon. It's from Cambait again, and it has the hole pattern on the bottom to match up with the 15mm rod adapters from Small Rig. So I'm going to add that plate to get a little extra height. Perfect. Throw the battery on there. Perfectly flush. I know not everybody uses a follow focus, but if you do, this F40 mini follow focus from Small Rig is fantastic for the money. It's small, lightweight, it's really adjustable, and it turns fairly smoothly. One of my favorite things about this latest version, I think this is Rev 3, is this smooth silicone gear that they put out here. And what that does is it allows you to be able to focus, lenses like this, non-cinema lenses, without having to use that gear strappy thing that we've had to use in the past. I always hated setting those things up. This just relies on friction to turn the focusing wheel, which is really nice. I plan to do a full review of this guy very soon, but for the purposes of this video, there are a few things that I do want to mention about this. The first being that with Sony lenses, at least, when you have the follow focus mounted on the bottom left side of the rig, the focus direction is backwards from what I'm used to. So the way it comes default is as you turn the wheel away from you, it focuses closer. And if you turn the wheel towards you or clockwise, it focuses the lens to infinity. That is backwards from the way my mind works. And the good thing is that it is very easy to swap this gear to the other side of the focus unit. The problem is that it doesn't work with all of my lenses. So this lens, for example, it does not work with this if I have an ND filter attached to the front or the matte box, because the bulk of this unit, it smacks into the ND filter or the matte box before the gear can make contact with the focus ring. So I'm actually still using this in the default configuration. It was a minor annoyance at first, but I got used to it really fast. And I'll put it this way. I'd rather have this and have it turn the wrong way than not have it at all. In addition to the follow focus unit itself, I also picked up this quick release plate from Small Rig. And this is not a necessary purchase. The follow focus will work just fine the way it is right out of the box. However, I got this because it allows me to keep this mounted to my rail system at all times and quickly and easily remove the follow focus when I don't need it, but also reattach it without having to realign things every time. I can just slap this on here and it's in the exact right spot, given that I'm still using the same lens. And in addition to that, this also raises the follow focus up a little higher and it gets it into a more comfortable position for me to reach. There it is. You can see how it raises the whole thing up a little bit. So the next item is not something that I always use, but sometimes I do have to use it, and that's a matte box. Now for those times when I do have to use a matte box, I use the Small Rig mini matte box. This guy is awesome. It's really small, light, it's easy to use. It accepts 4 by 5.65 filters. It comes with a bunch of adapter rings, so you can use it with your standard screw-on filters on your lenses. And that's actually what I do, because I'm constantly switching from, locked off to handheld to gimbal, and I usually use my regular screw-on filters for those other scenarios, the handheld or gimbal. I don't use the matte box for that. And I don't want to have to carry, big 4 by 5.65 filters for this and then have to carry around my regular filters for my other setups. So I just bring the one filter setup for this, and it works really well. Now, one of the drawbacks to this type of matte box is that, say you're changing a filter and you bump it. It can get skewed like that, and that's not great. You can accidentally bump it too. So I don't really like that. So I ended up, actually I've had this for a few years now. This is a small rig matte box support. So this is nice because it helps keep the matte box aligned, but it also adds support for your lens and matte box. So I'm going to install this right now. I've had this one for quite a while, and I think that SmallRig has actually discontinued this particular model, but they do have a new version out. So I'll be sure to link that down with the rest of the things that I've talked about today. That's how it works. And might as well throw a filter on here. This is my Polar Pro Peter McKinnon variable ND filter. And just like that, you got an ND. I have my Atomos Ninja 5 mounted in a SmallRig cage, and I have to admit that I initially hated the idea of adding a cage to my monitor, mostly because of the added weight. However, I needed a Sunhood for my monitor because I shoot outdoors a lot, and the Atomos Sunhood for the Ninja 5 is like $115, which is completely outrageous. So then I looked at other options, and I found out that I can get the SmallRig cage plus the Sunhood for about $100 US. So it started to make a lot more sense to me to go this route, especially because the Atomos Sunhood, for one, is like a big tunnel. It's deep on all 4 sides, so you can't even really get to the touchscreen controls at the bottom of the monitor. Didn't make any sense to me. So I went ahead and I purchased this cage, and actually I really love it now. One, because it has the SSD locks right here that keep you from accidentally ejecting your SSD. It has HDMI cable clamps, which you already know that I'm a fan of. It has various different mounting points on here. And what I really like is it has an integrated Nato Rail at the bottom. And like I talked about earlier, I like to use these SmallRig Nato Rail to Nato Rail clamps for the monitor. So that is what I'm going to do right now. There it is. And it's friction mount, really easy to use. And this Sunhood, it attaches through the loops in the monitor. There's just 4 of them. Sunhood is attached. Now we can attach the HDMI cable that I mounted earlier, and I can tighten up the HDMI cable clamp. This is the D-tap to threaded barrel connector that I got off of Amazon for powering the Ninja. Got the D-tap plugged in. Be careful when you're using D-tap because it is polarized. I know that the connector is keyed, but I have seen people shove this thing and jam it in there the wrong way, and it'll be a bad day if you do that. And let's route this cable up to the monitor. Plug it in, thread the barrel up, and the last thing to do is to use the USB-C to power the rig. All I'm doing is wrapping it around the bottom of the V-mount plate. And there we have it. We have a completed full-blown rig right here. I have a ton of fun. I could literally build these things all day. It's just so soothing and fun to work on. But now that we're done with this build, I want to show you going from the full-blown rig to a more run and gun setup, more lightweight, no V-mount. We're just going to run off the internal battery here. We're going to run off of a battery on this guy. So the first thing you got to do is undo the stuff I just did. So let's remove the D-tap power supply from the Atomos. Let's remove the USB-C power. I'm going to pull off the follow focus. Like I said earlier, why I got that little adapter is so that way I can remove this thing easier and get it out of the way. So follow focus is off. Now I also want to remove the matte box support and pull the whole rig off. Okay, so now we got the rig off. It's much smaller here, and the only thing I need to do now is to attach. I need to pull this adapter plate off and stick a battery on. And we're good to go. And if you don't want to use a matte box, which I probably wouldn't, not for this setup, then you can remove the matte box as well. And we're good to go. Got a nice, cool little setup here. Run and gun. It's super lightweight. Let me take the Sunhood off because it looks a little ridiculous in this studio environment. There we go. Run and gun. Okay, so that was the run and gun setup, but now say you want to switch over to your gimbal. So now what do? We're gonna remove this side handle. You could actually leave that on if you wanted to. I usually prefer to not have my gimbal working that hard. I like to make it as easy on the gimbal as possible, so I like to make my rig as light as possible. So I'm gonna remove the side handles. I'm going to undo the cable clamp here because I don't need the cable management right now. And I'm going to remove the Atomos. Last thing, I'm going to remove the top handle to keep the rig extra light. All right, so now going from the run and gun handheld rig, I'm stripped down now to just the half cage, my ND filter, my HDMI cable, and my HDMI cable clamp. Now I want to show you how easy it is to go to your gimbal setup. So here's my gimbal. All I have to do is slide the camera on, and it's in the exact right spot because that's exactly where I left it. Now the only thing I have to do now is remove this left handle here. I got my Nato Rail attached to the top of the Ninja cage now because I'm gonna run it underslung on this guy. Slide this guy on. I'm just attaching the HDMI cable right now. I have a little Velcro strap that I leave here for strain relieving this HDMI cable. I like to flip this handle back actually. So I think that this really shows the power of this setup, that I could go from a like full-blown cinema rig to a more handheld run and gun style rig, and then to a gimbal, all with minimal breakdown time and setup time. It was super fast, super easy. And you know, when you're out on a job, time is money. So being able to work fast and adapt to different scenarios really quickly is key. And like I said, all these setups have been like years in the making, trying to perfect it, trial and error, buying different cheese plates, all those types of things to get everything to work well together. And I think I've finally landed on something that I'm really happy with. So I hope that this, if you don't use the same exact things, I totally get it. Everybody's different, but I hope that it at least sparks some ideas to help set you guys down the right path to find your dream setup a little faster and easier than I was able to. I didn't say it earlier in the video, but I'll definitely be sure to leave links to every single piece of gear that I've used in this video to create these rigs. Well, this video went a little longer than I initially expected it to, but I think it was all worth it. I really wanted to take the time to get into the nitty-gritty details of all these different setups and show you guys what really went into it. But if you did find it useful, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out a lot. My name is Matt, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.